And I'm a first-year PhD student in the Department of Media. My background is in acting, and I studied performance studies and drama at Aberystwyth University. So my research is basically about these three things: acting, gaming, and posthumanism, and considering in what ways they all relate to each other. So the overall aim of the research is to examine how massively multiplayer online role-playing games could be considered to be creating a new platform for post-human performance. So first of all, I'll be looking at the literature on these on acting and posthumanism and considering the overlap. I'll then be engaging in a theoretical exploration of posthumanism with regards to online gaming practices, and then developing an exploratory autophenomenography which will provide the basis for a critical and descriptive reflection on the lived experience of gaming, and how this might compare to the experiences and practices of acting in the theatre. So I'll be paying particularly close attention to the relationships between gamer and avatar, and how this might compare to the relationship between character and actor in the theatre. So to give you a bit of context to situate my research in, performance studies is a field somewhat apart from drama, as it works on the basis that anything and everything can be studied as performance. Behaviour is the object of study, of performance study, as Richard Schechner says. And Schechner's performance theory has already considered some of the shared qualities of play, ritual, sport, and most importantly for my own research, games and theatre. And these shared qualities include aspects such as special ordering of time and special value given to objects. So my research into the experience of gaming as theatre and gamer as actor will extend this notion of game into video games, following Steve Dixon's work on digital performance and his discussion of the close correspondences between theatre and video games. So this includes aspects such as time, narrative, characters, tasks or missions, and emotional responses. And my project will complement Dixon's approach by focusing on an in-depth exploration of the subjective experience of gaming. According to Steve Dixon, the very idea of a virtual reality has its roots embedded in the theatre, as he argues that the theatre was the first virtual reality, a reality which the audience buy into with their willing suspension of disbelief. So using this theory, I would expand that notion to say that surely the very idea of a virtual self has its roots embedded in acting, as this is a self that someone can take on and embody and experience as a separate notion from, shall we say, the analog self. As psychiatrist Elias Abujamra, author of Virtually You, acknowledges, taking on that personality online can be seen as therapeutic. It relaxes and de-stresses, and offers us an opportunity to transcend or temporarily forget the conditions around us. However, what Abujamra doesn't acknowledge here is that this is actually what happens in acting, and Jerry Debu writes that the everyday self of the actor is forgotten through absorption and engagement of the body-mind with the activity. And Michael Chekhov states that he experiences a sense of joy, a release from my own personality, and awareness of the enactment of the creative idea, which otherwise would remain out of the grasp of my everyday consciousness. So you can see, looking at these quotes, it's already beginning to introduce some interesting notions of embodiment which are going to be relevant to my project, because this absorption and engagement of the body-mind with the activity could just as easily be described as embodiment, and importantly, it could just as easily be describing what happens to someone when they're gaming. So my project will be exploring some of these prevalent notions of embodiment and considering to what extent these are adequate to understand changes resulting from the fact that we are spending more and more time online and communicating and operating through computers. So within this context, I will be exploring and questioning the way in which the human presence can shift into virtual reality and sometimes into a visible avatar. So it's an exploration of the notion of embodiment by an actor in a theatre embodying a character, and a gamer in a massively multiplayer online role-playing game embodying an avatar. So this research project will be exploring whether the materiality of an offline human body is really, as Neil Whitehead suggests, supplanted by a no less real, online, imaginative embodiment. Obviously, embodiment is variously defined, and the exploration of the term in relation to massively multiplayer online role-playing gaming and acting encounters some interesting theories for discussion. So in alignment with my own research topic, Randall Walser claims that an actor in cyberspace is no different than one on stage, except that the body he or she gives her character is not a physical body, but rather a virtual one. One embodies the character, but is also embodied by cyberspace. A further consideration is given by James Gould G's suggestion that during play, the virtual minds and bodies of characters become the player's surrogate mind and body. And we could compare this to Marc Fortier in his book Theory Theatre, where he writes that when true theatre is taking place, and this is the goal of Stanislavski's method of acting, the actor passes from the plane of actual reality into the plane of another life. And this is where I think that this virtuality, this embodiment, this surrogacy, and this theatricality all start to lead into each other and link together, and why I think that gaming and acting are such comparable phenomena. If, as Frank Biotta states in The Cyborg's Dilemma, the body is a representational medium for the mind, some might suggest that we now have these alternative, potentially more sophisticated representational media, such as computers, online virtual worlds, and avatars, which do away with perceived negative aspects of the physical. And this is where you can start to see these ideas of embodiment begin to link up with embodiment as discussed in the conceptual framework of posthumanism. So Catherine Hales, in her 1999 book, How We Became Posthuman, suggested these suggestive elements of what might constitute a posthuman. And she says, the posthuman view thinks of the body as the original prosthesis we all learn to manipulate, so that extending or replacing the body with other prostheses becomes a continuation of a process that began before we were all born. As well as considering this idea of body as prosthesis in relation to the ideas of embodiment which I've already discussed, we could also begin to see how this might begin to compare to literature surrounding theatre practices. And so Steve Dixon here questions whether the intervention of these mediating technologies alters the chain of bodily information and communication production in performance. And he concludes, not if one accepts that theatre has always been the will to virtuality, and where the transformation of the human body has always been quintessential. Through external, where it means costume, makeup, lighting, and physical actions, and internal actions, such as mental focus and psychological characterization. So you can see that we could begin to suggest that, as Stefan Herbrechter, my director of studies, writes, posthumanism relies on questions and problems that have a long history and are therefore closely connected to other past and present contexts. As the theatre and acting has always considered the body to be a prosthesis, which we have already begun to extend, or in the case of some performances such as puppeteering, replace. We could also consider the gamer as a posthuman, as, returning again to Hales, she describes the posthuman subject as an amalgam, a collection of heterogeneous components, a material informational entity whose boundaries undergo continuous construction and reconstruction. And so the gamer could be understood as this posthuman material body who controls the informational entity with a constant shifting of agency between computer and human. And here Nate Garrels writes of the computer becoming an extension of the player, forming a cybernetic loop and ushering gamers into a cyborg state. Just to end, I'll briefly touch on this autophenomenography, which I mentioned earlier. So by considering the lived experience of gaming, this research is aiming to move away from purely theoretical speculation by offering a subjective first-person account of the experience of gaming and the connection between gamer and avatar. So I'll be immersing myself in these gaming environments and drawing on my own experiences and field notes to consider performative aspects of gaming and their similarities to acting. Caroline Ellis positions autoethnography as one of the approaches that acknowledges and accommodates subjectivity emotionality, and the researcher's influence on research rather than hiding from these matters or assuming they don't exist. And autophenomenography makes use of these accommodations, but rather than considering a particular culture or place, Jacqueline Allen Collinson defines autophenomenography as the researcher subjecting to rigorous analysis her own experiences of a phenomenon. Analogous to its ethnographic sibling, autophenomenography is capable of producing the rich, finely textured, thick descriptions of first-person experience and bringing life to the felt, lived, corporeal experience. Autophenomenography does remain a relatively unexplored methodology, and so the process will be refined throughout the course of the PhD, and the method will also be tested for relevance and representativeness by critically comparing it to existing and equivalent subjective gaming accounts, as many gamers already write about their own experiences of gaming through their own outlets, such as their online blogs. So by kind of critically comparing it to those, it serves to also justify the research method. Thank you very much.
What do you think is at stake in this juxtaposition? Because for me personally, you're pushing up what feels like an open door. I get the parallel. So what can we interrogate in a new and interesting way, or what insight into what realm? Is it mainly in a new understanding of what's going on in the gaming environment, or is it a reflection on what we all experience because we're all now somewhat prosthetic? Where does this land?
In a way, I would say ask me in 3 years. But
tell me the end of your thesis.
Yeah. I think that it's to do with gaming and really acknowledging the fact that actually what gamers experience is often portrayed by the media as quite a negative experience, and it's interesting when you compare some of the literature around how fantastic immersion in acting is, and that's the goal of acting, and you've really achieved it. And then, in relation to gaming, it's like, oh, we've lost them. We've lost them. It's addiction. They've gone. It's as bad as drugs and sex and rock and roll. And so I think that it's to do with kind of recontextualizing that and saying, actually, what happens when we look at gaming as a creative practice? Because as soon as you start to plumb into the creativity of gaming, it's just full of it. And to me, it seems like coming from a performative and acting background, I kind of just want to say, well, hold on a minute. This is all okay because this is what we want in theatre and in acting. But also, it's a kind of attempt at the kind of de-radicalising of posthumanism as well, because as you say, to a certain extent, there's these ideas that, we're all undergoing massive changes now. But I think that Stefan kind of hits the nail on the head when he says, actually, these problems have always existed, but now we've just kind of said that we're in a new time where we can suddenly pay attention to those things. And I think that part of what this will look at is acting as a proto-posthumanist practice, and saying that actually these things that we're really concerned about, perhaps we don't need to be, because it's just a part of everyday living and life in any case, but it's just being radicalised through new technology.